Hey everybody, this is Dark Arts, and we're back with another video real quick. So I finished off the last update video with not getting a chance to actually show off the particle effects on all of the machines. This is mainly due to there was a couple minor issues with how the machines were behaving. I actually did end up fixing this shortly after the video. Really simple problem. The machines just were not coded to basically check the recipe properly. And then there was a configuration issue. So when I was working on the configs, I accidentally fat-fingered when typing them and changed basically two values. Let me see if I can find it here in the recipe. So liquid waste processed yellow cake is basically meant to be used with the extractor. So I set up the extractor recipes, got them basically going where I thought they were good, and instead of putting this right here, I ended up actually grabbing this value up here. Now you see how that value is set to 1, and this value up here is set to 1,000. This basically resulted in it trying to put 100,000 liquid waste out of the end of the boiler, which was causing this whole setup to basically not work, so I didn't get a chance to really show off all the machines. But we can look at it now. They actually are working. On top of this, I actually did take a time to go ahead and look at why this slot was not working. I showed this off, I think, in a previous video, and we were trying to get stuff into the slot to get it to start the machine. Really basic problem, just recipe was not, or the machine was not set up to really check the recipe and ask the recipe like what resources can you support. So how the recipes are really coded, and let me go ahead and show this off as well since I do need to do a video at this some point, is recipes are really basic object classes. They're just a really simple thing that goes, okay, do you match? Which just only checks to see if we have the input ingredients. It actually never does check the output ingredients. This is for a particular reason, so that way that arrow can always keep moving, and if you end up actually, say for example you had 64 toxic waste in here, and you pulled out 1 and now went to 63, and this arrow was just getting ready to finish, it would then take over and put that extra item in the slot, rather than what a lot of machines do is either completely stop, so they'll just turn progress off and you lose all your progress on your thing, or they'll pause and they'll wait and wait and wait and so on and so on. But what I decided to do is, because all these machines do move and they are cycling, I just like, you know what, just let the machine just keep cycling, let it go for another run. It'd be like running your washer on another cycle while you wait for your dryer to finish or something. And people do actually do that, by the way, for those who go like, wait, I've never heard of that before. There actually are washers that are designed to continue to cycle the load until you actually open it. It'll keep the material, or keep the clothing from getting stagnant if you forget about it, and people do this all the time. I'm definitely an example of this, although my washer doesn't actually support that feature, but let it cycle and everything else. So it does actually check that, make sure that we only have the input, and then when it runs, it'll then check to make sure we actually have the output. So basically go, hey, can we output this, and so on and so on, and it'll do all the actual work to output it. It'll return true. It's actually needed for the animation that actually pops up, and what you'll see is like a really dark green burst when it's actually done with the recipe. And we should actually see that there goes, nice big dark green burst to show the end. I'm actually probably going to change the texture on that at some point. Definitely going to end up with custom particles, but yeah, that does that. But what I ended up actually adding down here was these little two checks that goes, is a component? And it will ask the recipe like, hey, do you use this as part of your thing? And the recipes are set up to basically extend a really basic abstract class, and this abstract class is actually loaded into what's called a recipe list. It's just a list of recipes, and it just contains an array list, and we simply can add recipes to it. This will be exposed via the API at some point in time. And we just go, okay, do you have a match? And this now actually has the ability to also check components, where it'll just go through every single recipe. We use the stream system from Java 8 for this just because so much easier than doing this part up here. I kind of want to switch this to this over here, but this is just so much easier to program than doing this, because this one's, you can do any match and then grab it. This is like a little bit more complicated to get working with this system, because I think you actually have to do filter and then grab. But we now have this ability, and this actually ties into several spots. The first main spot we only do it for this right here. I still have a little bit more work to do. There's a couple of spots it needs to go into, but when we go to fill the tank, which is what this actually does, is this will actually go into the machine, and it'll go, okay, we have this input slot right here. I want to take the item out of this input slot, and I want to dump its fluid content into this tank right here. This is kind of important because, say for example, you were actually grabbing like the centrifuge over here, and you wanted to run it, and you just wanted to really quickly, say for example, take the hexafluoride you had and dump it in there and get it running, and you just had one rod that maybe you found from a buddy, you took it from a raid or something, and you wanted to go ahead and process it, so you can put that in there so you can actually drain those and manually operate the machine. There's also other reasons for this. Eventually I think I might add inventory support. Right now we don't have inventory support for this slot right here. The only inventory support for inputs is actually on things like this right here where they have an input slot. There is no battery input as well, and there's no control over the other output slots for the fluids either. That's just mainly done because this is meant to be a manual process thing right there. But you can have that ability, so let's go ahead, drain. What it'll do is drain the items, so it'll go, okay, fill tank. I probably need to rename the method. Not a great example of a method name. We call it fill tank, and it's a little confusing, but it does have a slot in here, so it's a little bit self-explanatory. So you pick the slot you want to drain, and you tell it what tank you want to drain it in. So it's a really reusable method. You actually could take this code right now if you wanted to, and probably use it in your own mod with a little bit of editing. Keep in mind this is 1.7.10 code, so if you took this to 1.12, this entire bottom half I think doesn't even exist anymore, and everything now uses like iFluid handler via the capability system, and you have to recode this, and you'd also have to get rid of this part. But what it does is it gets everything and it goes, okay, I have a fluid container, I have a we're down here with a fluid registry. Registry is the old way of doing stuff. It's if you have something that's like a bucket. For example, if you actually can find an example here. So a bucket's registered in there, and it just says it has 1,000 millibuckets of fluid in it, and it just tells it, okay, if I drain that, it gives me a bucket in return. Very basic is what this whole lower part does. You can see how that actually works. But the upper half, iFluid container, does the same thing. They both just check, is a component in the recipe. We also do this on, I believe, each of the machines that has an input slot, which should be the extractor. If I go to the bottom here, does actually check if the is a component for input validation. This only just checks for input on stuff, because the reality of it is if I come over here and say, for example, grab some like wolf eggs or whatever, I can put them in any slot right now because we don't actually have slot checking. It does actually not crash because it's actually programmed not to crash. I don't think you can actually stick anything in this slot because I did program that to be an output slot only. If we go and find another machine here, we'll stick that in there, and it doesn't even care that that's in there because the boiler just, it goes, okay, I have this over here. But we can stick that in there and it won't really do anything because it doesn't actually care. Eventually this might be changed because it will reduce user error if you can't stick stuff in the slot. But that's what's kind of been fixed there, and of course with fixing that we can now stick stuff in the slots here and they'll actually drain, and we get all the animation running. With the animation, we've got a really kind of cool animation with the centrifuge. I do want to play with it a lot more and make it look really, really cool. I am thinking about scaling the particles down and actually making them come out of the centrifuge tops, because that isn't really hard to calculate. Just a little bit of trigonometry and you can actually figure out where the end of those each are and have them come off of that. I'm thinking of actually doing water droplets at some point as well that'll be colored with the material that you're currently centrifuging. So if you're centrifuging contaminated water, we would actually have a contaminated water drop just kind of bounce around. And this would all, of course, all be visual because I actually don't want there to be a world effect with these machines running, because the ideal use of these are actually meant to be lab machines. They're not really called lab machines yet, but they will be renamed later. And what I really expect you guys to do with these is like kind of build yourself a little laboratory, and I don't know if we get any blocks. I guess this will be the closest you can get. Just build like a really simple lab and just have some centrifuges running so you can really quickly make some fuel and just get it going. And in the future, you'd use a lot bigger, more complex machines to actually get a large bulk of fuel going to build really large reactors and everything else. But I'll leave you guys here, and I'll be back with more videos, content, updates, etc. here later.